Hello, and thanks for joining me here for another episode of Story Time. Today's story is called The Sugar Bowl, and it comes from my collection, Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories. The Sugar Bowl. Chloe would tell men that the slightly battered and tarnished sugar bowl was a legacy from her grandmother. Granny, she would say, her eyes fixed on a distant spot in the small apartment, had to sell all her possessions to keep my mother fed and warm. But she saved the sugar bowl for better times. And when she died, here her voice would quiver and a brave smile would slip across her face. She left it for me, for my better times. The story always worked on older men who brought her home after a pleasant dinner at an expensive restaurant. They would listen to her story as she poured the freshly brewed coffee into delicate porcelain cups, her light brown hair falling softly around her face. And they would be overcome with feelings of protectiveness for the young girl, so unlike the hard, brittle career women they were so used to. It would be almost obscene to think of taking this fragile flower to bed. Instead, they would kiss her chastely on the cheek and then leave, never understanding that it had all been carefully orchestrated. The dinner, the story, the quiver in the voice. And if they should call again, Chloe would be politely unavailable. She could not support a return engagement. Her story was only strong enough for a single run. Sometimes on those Saturday nights when none of the men appealed to her or she didn't appeal to them, she'd return home and fix herself a steaming mug of cocoa, watching the heat rise in swirls across the dark brown surface. Sipping the sweet liquid, she'd rehearse new versions of the sugar bowl story, trying in turn to look pensive or lonely or brave, or whatever emotion she thought would fit the tale and appeal to the men she brought home. This bowl, she would ask, wide-eyed and smiling, why, this is from my great-granny, my grandmother's mum. She worked in one of those old English manor houses, and the master took such a fancy to her. But you know, and her voice would drop as she cast her eyes demurely to the ground, it just wasn't done in those days to acknowledge a child born out of wedlock. Instead, she was sent away, although he did give her a silver tea set. It was worth a fortune. She sold it piece by piece, and the money she got for it saw her and the baby through the worst of the Depression. But she saved the sugar bowl to remember the sweetness of their love. Or it was all that was left of the items stolen by her gypsy grandmother from the man who had left her with child. Or, for those men attracted to bravery, it was the only item kept from the Nazis when they raided her great-grandparents' house. She kept it all those years, Chloe would whisper, a reminder of the cruel Germans who had shot her beloved husband to death while she, great with child, could do nothing to save him. No one knew the truth, of course. Sometimes even Chloe couldn't remember when she didn't have the sugar bowl. If she had been an artist, she could have painted a likeness of those mythical women, and no one, least of all Chloe, would have been able to tell that those features came not from memory, but from her imagination. She never tried to justify her stories to herself, but instead concentrated on developing new ones, adding to her repertoire, as though, like Scheherazade, her very life depended on it. And that is the opening to The Sugar Bowl, a story about a woman who is having difficulty maybe distinguishing between fact and fiction, between real life and the fantasies that she has created. You'll have to read the story to find out what has driven her to this kind of a circumstance, whether it works for her, how the story turns out, whether the sugar bowl finds a new home when Chloe finds a new home, or is this where Chloe will always be, in her little apartment, enticing men with her stories of bravery, courage, loss, and then giving them cups of coffee, cups of tea, with some sugar from the sugar bowl. You know, when I look at some of the stories I've written, I wonder, where do they come from? In this particular case, although I don't know anybody like Chloe, I do have a sugar bowl. I was at a flea market. I love going to flea markets. Flea markets are great places to find strange and wondrous things that people have discarded that are just what you always wanted, even though you didn't know it until you saw them. And actually, I found a sugar bowl, a small sugar bowl. It is silver. I know that because I have to polish it. It does get tarnished. And it sits on 4 little feet. I don't know if it's worth anything, but I was just so caught by it. It was the only piece there. It wasn't like there was an entire tea or coffee set there. But I loved it. I loved the heft of it. I love the way it looks when I polish it. And so the sugar bowl has become my sugar bowl. And it has also become the central figure in this story that I have created out of nowhere, out of wondering who might have had the sugar bowl. Where did it come from? Where did it live before it came to live with me? That is my story, The Sugar Bowl, and you can read the entire story, what happens to Chloe, and what happens to the other characters in the other stories that are part of Traveling Left of Center and other stories. Some are funny, some are odd, some are serious, but I hope if you do read them, you will enjoy them all. Thank you so much for being part of my little story time. I hope that we have a chance to meet again when I will read another story. Take care.